Dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our event, Transforming Crisis and Grief into Hope and Action. On behalf of the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, we're delighted to bring you this event in observance of World Interfaith Harmony Week. Over the past year, New York City has really seen its share of crisis and grief, from the COVID-19 pandemic wreaking havoc in our various communities, bringing with it a widening sense of inequality, to the various impacts of climate change, from the increasing heat that has been spreading in the summer, to the lack of access to proper shelter in the winter. Our communities here in New York have seen its share of struggles and strife. However, in the face of all of these challenges, we have found that faith-based organizations and spiritual organizations have been at the heart of the response, a holistic response in helping to ensure that we transform this struggle and this suffering into hope and action. We're really happy to be able to gather today with a group of strong faith and spiritual leaders that have been doing tremendous work here in New York City to share with you some of the ways that our various faith traditions and spiritual traditions have informed how we're able to take this crisis, or the multiplicities of crisis that we face, and turn it into hope for those who have been impacted and action for those who are blessed to be able to not be as impacted. And so, with this, I'd like to first introduce our fantastic panel of speakers. So, I will go ahead and share my screen so you can delight with me in their faces and bios. So from the far left to the right and then down to the middle column and bottom column, first we have Reverend Dominique Atchison, who currently serves as the Director of Faith Engagement for the First Lady of New York City. She formerly worked as the Executive Director of the Mayor's Center for Faith and Community Partnerships and is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. She has served as a minister in churches and healthcare settings throughout the city of New York, and is a singer, performance artist, and blogger. Her writings have been featured in blogs including For Harriet, the Huffington Post blog, the Young Women's Clergy Project, and the African American Lectionary. To her right, we have Venerable Ruifa from the American Buddhist Confederation. Venerable Ruifa became a monk in 1978 and was ordained in 1979 and graduated from Lingyang San branch of the Chinese Buddhist College and came to the United States to promote Dharma in 1993. He was the president of the American Buddhist Confederation and the current honorary president, and founded Guang Temple in 2003, where he serves as its abbot. To his right, we have Rabbi Robert Widom, who is the senior rabbi of Temple Emanuel of Great Neck. He was ordained in 1961 at the New York School of the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, and served as rabbi of congregations throughout the metropolitan area since. Rabbi Widom also organizes the Long Island Association of Faith Partners, which composes of Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim groups, in addition to being the secretary of the Association for Progressive Judaism. Underneath, I guess to the right, if we want to keep going to the right, we have Reverend Steve Yagerman, who is the All Saints Episcopal Church rector since 1993. He completed his Doctor of Ministry at Hebrew Union College and is a psychoanalyst licensed by the state of New York, having been a postdoctoral fellow at the William Allison White Institute and has trained at the National Psychological Association for Psychoanalysis. To his right, we have Carl Murrell, who is the principal representative to the United Nations of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. He's worked with the Baha'i community at the UN for 3 decades on a wide variety of issues. Whew. Okay, take a breather. To his right, we have Reverend Peggy Clarke, who is the senior minister at the Community Church of New York. She's also the co-founder of Intergenerate, which is a food justice organization here in New York and has been a climate activist for many years. Reverend Clarke is also the co-host of a podcast called Hope and Heresy: Life on the Religious Left. And then to her right, we have Angad Singh, who is a research scientist by day and leads the community empowerment efforts at United Sikhs. Angad has been with the United Sikhs for about 7 years now and deeply cherishes the opportunity he gets to meet and work with a diverse set of people that United Sikhs engages with. To his right, we also have Father Brian McWeeney, who serves at the Archdiocese of New York. He'll be joining us later in the call, and we'll give him the opportunity to say hello at that point as well. And then to his right, we have Dr. Kenneth Liao, who is the Deputy Executive Director of Tzu Chi's Northeast Region, the Chair of Medical Development, and also serves as a representative to the United Nations. So, all in all, a really big mouthful of really fantastic people. Their bios I had to cut down way so much, and they've just been doing so much great work here in New York, and it's such a gift to be with everyone today, and I'm super grateful. So together, we're going to be reflecting on one critical question, which is also the title of this event: how do our faith traditions transform crisis and grief into hope and action? And we're really doing this in the spirit of mutual understanding, to draw out the wisdom from each one of our traditions, to be able to learn from each other, build trust, and really see what we can take from each one of our faith traditions and apply into our own work. Hopefully, at the end of this, we'll have a better understanding of each other and also of what the possibilities are moving forward, so we can not only respond to this crisis, but crises to come, and ensure that those we heal are resilient and better for it. As participants, this dialogue is interactive. If you feel compelled to in hearing those who are sharing, please feel free to type your questions in the chat, but also please feel free to type stack, that is STACK, into the chat, which expresses to us that you would like to share some of your reflections in response following the preset order of all of our speakers. We're going to go ahead and invite first Reverend Atchison to give us her prepared 5 minutes remarks, following which we'll go down the speaking order. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Freeman Sue and to Steve Chu. You guys have been so patient and welcoming to me. This invite came in the midst of a transition from one job to another. So you guys have been patient in my delays, but I am so grateful to be here. Freeman Sue served on our Faith Sector Advisory Council for COVID recovery. And so I'm just grateful that our relationship can continue in this way. So I just want to reflect briefly on the question at hand. And I think it's a really important question. I'm so grateful to be in dialogue with people from multiple traditions on this question. But I'm somebody who is ordained in the United Church of Christ, but my roots and heritage are in the Baptist Church. And this question of crisis and grief into hope leads me to my Baptist roots, where we, often sometimes joke as preachers about early Sunday morning and the story of Jesus dying and then rising again on the third day. And oftentimes, when you're a Baptist preacher, the thing that gets people the most stirred up is when we tell that story of Jesus dying on a Friday and then raising up early Sunday morning. That's in our tradition. And I think that speaks to sort of what we're talking about today, is sort of facing a lot of death, facing a lot of very difficult situations, but finding moments of hope and resurrection in the midst of a season when there is so much pain and suffering. And one of my favorite texts in my tradition is Romans 8:28. And actually my necklace is Romans 8. But it says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. And sort of where I want to focus is the notion that in all things, God works. And so even the good and also the bad, God is working. And the thing that I find hope in is that so much good has come out of this really difficult season. We have been able to have conversations about racial justice and equity that we've never been able to have during this season that has been so difficult for so many, but there's something about the fact that everyone is facing tragedy at the same time that makes people, I think, a little bit more compassionate about other people's stories. And we saw in the midst of this that, you know, the Asian community faced a lot of anti-Asian sentiment because of the origins of, you know, COVID-19 and some, you know, very unfair and unjust violence in some cases. But then we saw a lot of compassion around that. We saw George Floyd and Breonna Taylor die. But we also saw a lot of people getting more aware and curious about racial justice issues, and again, compassionate around those things. So in the midst of something where everyone was facing a lot of pain, there was also a lot of good things that have come because people are in their hearts a little bit more, and able to have compassion for other people a little bit more. And all of these things we never thought could happen are happening. We got our first Black woman and Indian American woman president. I mean, sorry, vice president. Maybe she'll be president one day. And we got some things, you know, there's innovation that's happening. A lot of people are on technology that they've never been on before and learning new things. We got student loan relief, which has been a blessing for me personally. I don't know about anyone else. Stimulus checks, all sorts of things. And the work that I'm doing right now, working with the Racial Inclusion and Equity Task Force that is being led up by the First Lady and Deputy Mayor Thompson. This is something that cities have never seen before. People from the most underserved communities working for city government, serving the communities that they came from. So there's just so many really great things that are happening in response to some of the hardship that we've all faced. So I think that I'll end my reflection here, but I'm open to conversation. But thank you again for welcoming me.
Thank you so much, Reverend Atchison. Definitely echoing your sentiments around how through this suffering, we've become deeper connected with our sense of interdependence and interconnectedness, and realizing that one people's struggle is all people's struggles, and that we cannot flourish unless all thrive. I'll now pass it over to Venerable Ruifa from ABC to really share with us more on this idea of cultivating compassion and really that interconnectedness we all share.
Good morning. Can you
Good
hear me?
morning. Yes, loud and clear.
My name is Ruifa from American Buddhist Confederation. I'm glad to these events for the Harmony Week, which Tzu Chi Foundation, New York, hold this event. Thank you for Stephen and Sue invite me to join this great event. In Buddhism, as this COVID-19 pandemic in this last year, since last year from now, in New York City, not only New York City, whole world face this crisis. Many people got positive in COVID-19 virus, and many people lose their lives, lose their loved ones. So in Buddhism, when we face this crisis, we need to think about what is cause this effect. That means what cause we today face this crisis. In Buddhism, we need to face this crisis and think about why we face this one. In traditional Buddhism, we always think that people, like all, like especially human beings, overuse the resources of the world, of the like planet, take the oils, other resources overuse that make the whole world, like climate change, the environmental problems. So, and then we face this COVID-19 virus. So at this time, many people face this crisis. They lose their loved ones. They get grief. So in Buddhism, we need to, like ancient master tell us, we need to, like say in Chinese, 以病苦为良药. I don't know how to translate, Steve.
That might be a Freeman. Freeman, if you'd like to quickly just translate that for us.
That means that we change, we see the suffering as a lesson, then become our medicine. Yes.
So thank you, Sue. So in Buddhism, we need to use our compassion and wisdom to face the crisis, to make it hope in action. Like today, we are joining the Harmony Interfaith Harmony Week. That's the one we all come together to face this crisis and griefs and make it hope. Like we face this crisis in New York City, there are many charities, organizations who help others, like Tzu Chi Foundation, like American Buddhist Confederation. They come together, do something to give something like mask, like other things like food to someone who need. That's make hope, make people, they think they still in hope and still have someone to care of them. So this is really important, really meaningful for these events, like the Harmony Week, Interfaith Harmony Week. We come together and make this world beautiful, face the crisis, make it, all people have their hope and make in actions. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Venerable Ruifa. Definitely thinking about karmic cause and effect and how we, through our extractive overuse of the world's resources, have generated this challenge for us to all collectively face, and also drawing upon that Buddhist wisdom that crisis is the moment to cultivate wisdom and compassion, really much linking back up with Reverend Atchison's previous comments, and knowing that through the giving of material aid, we're showing people who are isolated that they aren't alone and that they're connected back to this community. I'll now pass it over to Rabbi Widom. And I'll ask to unmute. All right, you're good. We can hear you, Rabbi.
Hear me. So again, to say thank you. Welcome to all colleagues and friends. I'm going to comment on how Judaism deals with and teaches how we are to handle suffering or crisis. It teaches that Judaism is, God has given us all that we need to bear our lot in life, that faith arms us with courage to outface a crisis with firm heart and intrepid will. And when tragedy comes to the Jewish community, it requires all of our own personal emotional stamina, for no one is really ready for a loss of a loved one. But no one ever escapes grief. Every path converges on the valley of the shadow, and all faith communities must deal with the same issue of how one deals with someone passing away. But when sorrow comes, I have learned that all of the simple things come to help. Memory helps us to rehearse and review kindness and love. All of the words shared help to keep a loved one with us. Our tradition also affirms that no accident of disordered flesh can ever destroy a loved one. Memory transmutes death into deathlessness. What is remembered are the words spoken, the deeds performed, which must always be treasured up as incentives to our conduct by which the living and the loving honor those who have passed on. Prayer is useful as it helps us to renew all of our inner strength to deal with challenges. Our own depleted inner visible within us that we need to draw upon. We need that strength. Withstanding of our own personal losses or crises, we have also been struck by tradition and faith, notwithstanding, to continue and bless, and by so doing, we find a way of healing ourselves. For our tradition, we call to crisis that we and share a week of being with them. This in our tradition is called 7 that we learn that healing begins with those who enjoy the actual people with another. They abstract from their anguish and pain. The tradition also abstractions as well as Am I losing?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a little coming in and out, Rabbi. I turned off your video. I don't know if that's helped a bit.
Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that's helpful a bit. I think we began to get a little bit lost, and the audio started to chop up a little bit around how prayer helps us to renew inner strength. Could I ask you to maybe start
Sure.
reflections from there
Yes.
again?
Let me reflect upon the use of prayer.
Thank you so much.
Because deal with challenges. It helps us to charge our own visible inner battles. We
Still lost.
I might ask everyone to turn off videos for a second, just so we can see if that'll help Rabbi's internet connection.
I don't know why they're muting us.
Uh,
Can you hear me now?
yes. Can you try again, Rabbi?
Well, I'm just prayer beside memory, beside keeping in mind all of the little nameless acts of loved ones. Prayer helps us to renew our strength to deal with challenges. For prayer helps us to recharge our own inner batteries, that invisible self where we store strength so we can deal each day with what confronts us. But notwithstanding our own personal experiences of crisis and challenge, we are instructed by our faith to continue to serve and bless the living regardless of our own challenge, and by so doing for others, that we are to visit the home of the process that we learn begins with an app. Having peace in the house helps to assuage some of the pain. The tradition also is well oneself in one word to find activities other than what shared with the ones to visit oneself with family, but always with people, because that helps us to get through the difficult morning period. And being with people one find kind and knowledge one ever home. It was one of our sisters, his name was Rabbi, who 2,000 years ago, calling to the role of the individual, this process of helping other people. He said,
Rabbi, I'm sorry, it's still coming a little rough, and we're having difficulty hearing. Can I ask that you maybe restart your Zoom call again and then join us once more? I'm sorry that the internet's not being really cooperative and you're a little difficult to hear. So sorry about that. We'll go on.
sorry.
No, no worries, no worries. Um, we can invite everyone to turn back on videos again. But we'll continue on, and then Rabbi, when you join us again, we'll try to give you another 2-3 minutes to add reflections like once more. Also, make note that Father Brian has joined us as well, and so we're delighted to have him in conversation with us as well. Um, so now I will go ahead and pass it over to Father Stephen Yagerman to give us some reflections from his perspective, recognizing that Rabbi Widom had reflected with us that really our memory of our loved ones gives us the strength to continue to serve those who are with us now.
Thank you. And thank all of you for being here. And I want to say it usually takes me about 5 minutes to say thank you and say hello. And so if I run out of time, I'd like to sum up my talk and say, I think my main point is that we're all in this together. We're all in this. And so for too long, I think we've seen that we've not been in this together, that our way is the right way. In our tradition, in the Christian tradition, I think I like to always say there's two kinds of this and two kinds of people. Like, there's people who feed the dog at the table and people who don't feed the dog at the table, and they can never quite get along. And in some respects, in our tradition, there are those who think that the faith is universal, and that the main goal of it is to influence and impact the here and now. And there is another tradition that sees it as being fairly exclusive to us being kind of a chosen people, and that justice will be restored in the by and by, in the afterlife. I tend to be in the more of the here and now. I think about this from our tradition, which begins in one of the Gospels with the Magi who come from the east. They follow a star. They're not of the same faith as the biblical faith, and yet they find the light, and they pursue the light, and in finding the light, they find the truth. And to me, this is the beginning of a universal message. And regarding the message of responding to the here and now, there's a story in the Gospel of Mark where two of the disciples, John and James, say to Jesus, "Hey, can we sit at your left hand and your right hand when we get to heaven? Can we help rule in heaven?" And Jesus says, "That's not my business. That's not my job. And quite frankly, if you really want to do something right, you should practice serving your fellow human beings. Practice serving your fellow human beings." And this is what I heard from the minister, the Baptist minister in Atlanta, Reverend Warnock, who ran for Senate and won in Georgia. He said, "I'm a Matthew 25 Christian." Now, not everyone knows what a Matthew 25 Christian is, but that means somebody who responds to human need. Somebody whose main criteria of being good or bad or being just or unjust is how did you respond to human need? And again, I said my main point is that we're all in this together, and that as we've faced this pandemic, we could begin to see ourselves as splintering apart. You know, you might have the germ that kills me. You might have the virus that destroys my family, and we see each other with suspicion. And so that can be with any disease, with any kind of othering throughout history, throughout all cultures, where we see the other as being damaging. We see the other as being dangerous. We see the other as that we see our safety as being in avoiding the other or scapegoating the other. And I think the primary message of the New Testament, as I see it, is to respond to human need, to feel empathy and connection with those around us, to replace scapegoating with forgiveness. The idea of the resurrection is that the one who was crucified comes back, and instead of getting justice and revenge, offers forgiveness. And that is the undoing of the walls between us. So I see that as we are all people of faith, instead of each one of us trying to win people to our point of view, that we understand that we're all in this together. Those who believe, those who don't believe, those who believe differently, and that the criteria is that we respond to and serve human need as an act of empathy and an act of love and compassion. And one of the signs of that is that we are, in this cooperation with the Tzu Chi Center across the street. That's why they let me come and speak today, because once a month they come and feed our people at the homeless center, and when they need more space, they can come to our church and gather. And we feel like we're Tzu Chi South, and they're All Saints North. You know, I don't feel any difference. So anyway, that's my spiel. Do I have more time?
About 10 seconds left.
Thank you. Okay, that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your reflections, and definitely thinking about that duality of inclusivity and exclusivity, and how much more powerful of a movement of healing we can be when we set aside our differences and celebrate what we have in common together as the one collective species of humanity. I'll now pass it over to Carl to bring us some additional reflections about our humanity from the Baha'i perspective.
Thanks, Steve. When when I read the question, the title, I thought, and first of all, let me thank all the speakers who preceded me. I would say ditto and in agreement. One of the things we're talking about is transforming the perspective of crisis and grief, and turning it into opportunities. When I read the title, I thought about Baha'u'llah's daughter. You know, Baha'u'llah he's probably founded the Baha'i faith, for those of you who don't know, but he was in prison his entire adult life, and his children were raised in this condition. And his daughter was especially people were especially fond of her. That she was the one that people went to when they were having a really rough time, a really troubling time. You know, just one example of the kind of difficulties that she had when she was a child. You know, one of the banishments, Baha'u'llah, from one prison to another was done in the middle of the winter. They had no provisions, no warm clothing. They did the best they could, and their mother, through her guile, was able to get some flour, and she would feed each child a handful of flour during the day, one handful. That was all they were able to eat. So this is the kind of difficulty she grew up in. And you know, one thing we haven't talked about is like what is the transformation of each individual through these processes. And this was what she came up with in the life that she, and in the midst of the cruelties that she grew up in. She said we ought to show something more than forgiveness, and meaning the cruelties and strictures of our own lives. To be hurt and forgive is saintly, but far beyond that is the power to comprehend and not be hurt. This power we may have acceptance without complaint, and it should be associated with our name. We ought never to be known to complain or lament. It is not that we would make the best of things, but that we may find in everything, even in calamity itself, the germ of enduring wisdom. And I remember, you know, the first time I read that, you know, as a young man of African descent in the United States, that was a bit, I thought it was incredible, but I also thought it was very difficult, you know, to comprehend and not be hurt, to find in everything, even in calamity itself, the germ of enduring wisdom. But you know, how do people think of us? Do they think of us as complainers? And what does that bring to the solution? If we don't complain or lament, then what are we drawing on in our seeking for solutions? And so one of the things I wonder about is, you know, we're human beings, and we do have things which trouble us and which are difficult for us and which we're going through. And it might seem that we could take our private complaints and laments in prayer or meditation or supplication to the Creator and find that enduring wisdom in those contemplations, so that we are not hurt, so that we may face the world with the same radiant acquiescence that we were created to exhibit. So that's something I just want to share with everyone, that we can find something beyond forgiveness. And it's wonderful to know that that is possible.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Carl. And also thank you for sharing the power that comes from individual transformation. Because you're right, it's this societal and systemic transformation that we seek and that we're really excited about in this moment, right? But it's also this opportunity from crisis that we have, where each of us as individuals have that opportunity to see how we can grow beyond this situation. I'll now pass it over to Reverend Peggy Clarke to give us reflections from the Unitarian Universalist perspective.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I think this is a beautiful and important conversation. I'm really grateful to be part of it. I am a senior minister at Community Church of New York, which is in Midtown, but more specifically, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, which is often a misunderstood religion. So the question of where my tradition finds hope in times of grief, I thought, well, I don't know if people even know what my tradition is. So for those of us who don't know, we are a faith that grew originally from two Christian traditions, although we no longer identify necessarily as Christian. One of those traditions rejected Trinitarian theologies, choosing reason and experience as a primary source, and the other declared all people are saved. We are also non-creedal, which means we don't have a single doctrine to which everyone adheres, because a central tenet of our faith is that revelation continues to unfold, that it was not set once and for all time. So as humans evolve, we discover new truths, and we're open to this changing reality. And we seek deeper spiritual lives in light of these many paths and many ways of knowing. So for the question about grief and suffering and finding hope, I actually start with a theology of attachment. We live in relationship with ourselves, with each other, with all living creatures. We are called to a life of loving. And I think the challenge really is to love well. The challenge is sometimes to know what loving well even means. And sometimes loving well can be very complicated, right? I mean, I can feed my family hamburgers for dinner, and that can be a loving act, but there are larger questions, right? How well am I loving the cow and the farm workers and the earth when I do that? We are living in a radically, wildly interconnected world. So my loving well has to include all of the beings in the system. The point is that the task of being alive is to embrace life, to connect, to commit to all of it. So this means that I am called to embrace the reality of my own broken heart. And if I attach, I will grieve, I will suffer. And that's part of being alive, of living into the fullness of the gift of life that I've been given. So I'm called to love well, to learn how to love well, and I'm called into a reality and maybe a ministry of a broken heart. Not all grief, not all suffering is inevitable. So part of the work of our faith is to create just systems that reduce our vulnerability. In my tradition, we prioritize justice work, really as a way of decreasing exposure. We want to fix systems that create unnecessary suffering. Right now, we live in a time of so much grief, of overwhelming suffering. And I'm finding that there is this temptation to withdraw, maybe made easier by the necessity of isolation and quarantine and lockdowns. But hope is found not in the separation, but in the association. It's found in the attachment. Hope is in relationship. It's in the experience of love that we have for each other. It's found in the ways we take care of each other, the ways we really love each other well. So in our tradition, when someone dies, we memorialize them. We get together, we tell their story, we tell our stories about them. We loved this person, we attached, and we grieve. We find hope in the love itself, in the love that pulls us all back together, in the love we demonstrate with and for each other. And because of that hope, we commit to continue to witness each other's lives, right? There's always more to do, more systems to heal, more people on the margins to pull into the center, more ways we break ourselves open and pour ourselves out in service of each other. There are always more opportunities, more people to love. And in my tradition, that is where hope lives. Hope lives in the reality that even as the systems are broken, even as our hearts are broken, that we are wildly connected to each other, and that we continue to hold on, hold fast to each other. And for us, that's where hope is born. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for also raising how ever present this temptation to withdraw is, and how it's by going against this tide of wanting to withdraw that we find that true sentiment of hope and love for each other. I'll now pass it over to Angad to give us some reflections from United Sikhs.
Thanks, Steve. I'm happy to be part of this esteemed panel and the wider audience. I absolutely agree that it's important to have dialogue between people of different faiths or walks of life, for that matter. And I appreciate the topic of the day as well. I think it's very pertinent. In 2020, all of us saw the pandemic. We saw a few other big things. We saw the Black Lives Matter movement. And, for those of you who have been following what's going on, the rest of the world, there's some big protests going on in India, or you can go to other parts of the world and you can see there's a lot going on. So now, at this point, I would like to introduce the concept of Chardi Kala in Sikhi. Now, there is this concept called Chardi Kala, and translated into English, it means keeping high spirits, having eternal optimism. So maybe I should go back a little bit to the theology of Sikhi and talk about how does Sikhi look at joy and sorrow. So in our faith, we are asked to look at both joy and sorrow in equal measure. We are not asked to differentiate between the two. We are not asked to consider that one is good and the other is bad, that one we should seek out and the other one we should not. So everything is considered as part of the divine order of things. It's how God wants things to happen. It's how he wants the world to run. So if everything is as per divine order, and if happiness and sorrow are just part and parcel of life, like night and day, for instance, so that begs the question, what is there to even be unhappy about, when there is something perceived as sorrow by us? So, and all of this can be captured in these two words, which is Chardi Kala, which is basically that no matter what is going on, whether things are happening the way you want them to, or things are not happening the way you want them to, but you have to remain in Chardi Kala. You have to remain in high spirits. So you have to continue to do what you need to do, what you understand that you need to do. And all of this can be achieved if we constantly remember God in our minds. So it's not something that I'm just going to sit down every day, for 20, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, or however long. I would probably do that. But the idea is to be, constantly remembering God. And I would take the example of a mother. I think when you look at a mother in general, you can find some very nice examples. So, you might have a working mom who's probably, out and about at her office doing her work, but her thought is probably still, back home where her child might be. So she's constantly thinking about her child. So that's sort of the, the way we are asked to approach living in this world, that we constantly think about God, but then just go about our daily routine, do whatever we need to do. In fact, this is Chardi Kala is something that we talk about in our daily prayers as well. So at the end of every service, at the end of every prayer, we have something called an ardas, and the last two lines in that ardas say, Nanak Naam Chardi Kala, Tere Pane Sarbat Da Pala, which basically means that here is where Guru Nanak, who started the Sikh faith, he says that I need to keep God's name in my heart all the time. And this way I remain in the highest of spirits. And while remaining in the highest of spirits, I am able to serve humanity the way God wants me to do. If I'm depressed, I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do. So I have to be in good spirits, no matter what is happening around me. Like some of the people before me, they already put that very well. So no matter what is going on around me, I need to remain in high spirits. I need to understand this is the way, this is the divine order, and I just need to fulfill my role, and I need to do the best that I can. It's in this spirit that United Sikhs has, even last year. When the pandemic began, the office of the mayor, requested for meals to be distributed. So langar is a very important thing in the Sikh faith, a community meal, langar or a community meal. If you walk into any of the Sikh temples, when service is going on, you will also find langar or a community meal. Everyone is welcome, to join in. So all throughout 2020, whether it was the pandemic going on or if it was the Black Lives Matter movement going on, people are out in the streets, they're protesting, they have something to talk about, which is extremely important. And so United Sikhs and the volunteers, they have been out and about, they have been trying to serve the people and help them achieve their goals, which in a way are our goals as well, as we are one humanity. So, and that is where I think the idea of action, which is in today's topic as well. So the idea of action becomes important, and it is important because there's, you have to walk the talk. So action is extremely important. So, so with this, I come back to the idea of Chardi Kala, that yes, you need to remain in high spirits. You don't need to see whether it's, things are happening your way or not happening your way. You just, keep going. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for those reflections and for sharing the principle of Chardi Kala. I think being able to acknowledge the present, whether that is our suffering or our joy, and recognizing the non-duality to it, and then being able to still press forward steadfastly in order to help serve humanity is such a beautiful principle that we all share in this space. I'll now welcome Father Brian from the Archdiocese of New York to share some reflections on his side on how our faith traditions transform grief and crisis into hope and action. I think we have to unmute first.
I think I can speak now.
Yes.
I am absolutely delighted to be with all of you. I've told Cardinal Dolan, my boss, that I have the best job in the church because I can relate to so many other traditions, and I've been receiving such great growth from other traditions, particularly in my trip to Taiwan to be with the Buddhist community. We spent a week and a half together, and how much I learned during that trip about the Buddhist community. But I think our faith begins with that of the faith of our older brothers, the Jewish community, especially at the moment of creation, when God says to us, not here's the world, but says you are to be stewards of creation. And when Jesus came centuries later, he continued that thought, especially as Steve brought out in Matthew 25, a great, great challenge. And the church over the centuries has failed many times. And I think we have to come in touch with that failure, but also with the idea that we have succeeded, that we're progressing, that we're on a pilgrimage of life that is part of us and yet much bigger than us. And our present Holy Father, Pope Francis, certainly has brought that to our understanding in two particular ways through his encyclical Laudatio Si, in which he said that we must preserve and strengthen our love of creation. And we must act responsibly, not only for our generation, but for all the generations yet to come. But also most recently in Fratelli Tutti, in which he says, not only must you hear the cry of creation, you must hear the cry of the poor. You must reach out. And one of the things that sometimes is disturbing to me as a Catholic priest is I have these wonderful dialogues with many of you. And yet, are we seeing those dialogues translate into action? In some ways, they do. I enjoy being with my Islamic brothers and sisters many times when they are feeding the poor, when they're caring for the homeless. And that is a joint effort. And certainly, we're working very closely with the whole community in terms of immigration justice for all, trying to be as best we can inclusive. Do we have a long way to go? Yes. And that's why we have, even in times of great difficulty, hope. But that faith and hope must always ultimately result in real reform, in real action, individually and as a community. And it is my hope that our Catholic community better represents our stewardship and better represents our Lord and Savior by reaching out to one another and saying, we have so much in common. Let us recognize that. Let us recognize that sometimes our theological concepts are the same, though we use different words. It's so important to embrace one another. And that is the virtue of Zoom, but also the vice. Because one of the things that I've been missing these last few weeks have been sitting down with my Buddhist brothers and sisters, which we meet monthly, and being able to share some food with them. Although I must say, the vegetarian diet is a challenge for this Irishman. But it's so wonderful to be able to sit down and embrace them and love them. And the same with my other dialogues that I have with many of you. I would hope that this dialogue today will continue. And most of all, the friendship that we have with one another. And also the care that we have for all of our brothers and sisters and for the world in which we live. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Father Brian, for really raising us and bringing us back to that sense of friendship, kinship, and the connections that we share with one another. And for really pointing out that it is through action that our faith materializes. I'll now invite Kenneth Liao from Tzu Chi to share perspectives.
Good morning, Dr. Liao. On behalf of Tzu Chi Foundation and Master Zhen Yan from Taiwan, we would like to hope and pray that every sentient being in this world is safe in mind, body, and spirit. As pandemic hit New York, and when New York City became the epicenter back in end of February and March, Tzu Chi Foundation, Tzu means compassion, Chi means relief. As we are Buddhists in action, we immediately set up the Medical Relief Center in our headquarters in LA with 9 other chapters around the nation. We immediately, through the help of many other organizations, NGOs, profit and non-profit volunteer organizations. We proceed to procure and collect the PPEs. As a medical professional myself, I had the first contact with many health professionals, my colleagues who were using a single N95 for weeks and weeks and wearing the same surgical gown during intubation. So through the concerted efforts of many people that I mentioned, including KAIPA, which I have to be thankful, Chinese American IPAs in New York, whom we partner with for all these years, and TIMA, which is Tzu Chi International Medical Association worldwide, we were able to procure and finally able to distribute the PPEs, which are masks, face masks, surgical gown, everything, face shield, to over 200 health institutions, doctors, interfaith nursing homes, and many others, including individuals, the first responders, and FDNY, NYPDs, and many other interfaith religions. Secondly, we also have the food pantries. Together with the food bank, we are able to distribute through also masses from Taiwan, the instant rice that we're able to give to many people who are in shortage of not only food, but finances. We also give financial aids on the case-to-case basis, and we also provide psychological aids. So you can see on the picture, these are some of the PPEs that we distribute to the Harbor House and other institutions. You can also see the food pantry that we have given, and also you could see on the recipients that they're holding a bamboo bank, which is how we have the humble beginning of Tzu Chi Foundation 55 years ago, by saving a few pennies in the bamboo bank, which we still carry the tradition. The 4 cardinals of Tzu Chi relief is the right, practical, timely, and we respect. Thirdly, we also have institution at Cafe 229, which is our Tzu Chi Center in Manhattan. As you can see, Cafe 229 was started when the pandemic started. The theme is compassion in action, freedom, and enlightenment. Our Dharma Master Zhen Yan, the founder of Tzu Chi Foundation, teaches that we should have grand lesson. Grand lesson meaning first, purify one's heart and spreading the great love, which is full, complete, and with no blemishes. Buddha, over 2,500 years ago, foresee and predict that the future, there are going to be 5 turbinities. The future is now, which includes the changes in climate, wildfire, drought, flood, and also 5 spiritual poisons, which are basically greed, anger, ignorance, arrogance, and doubt. There are no remedies in eradicating, exterminating, or taking care of the virus. In Buddhism, we believe in cause and effect. Because of our greed, we consume animals. At the same time, we consume germs, bacteria, and viruses. The pandemic is one way of retribution, where the lost souls and the demons, they claim their revenge onto the human being. Just like SARS, there's no way to, from the medical standpoint, to eradicate the viruses. We can only be able to live with them harmoniously, meaning that we have to promote vegetarianism by stopping consuming meats and going vegetarianism, we are able to contain and live with the virus, just like SARS, just like flu. We can downgrade them to a normal, less harmful virus. It is not easy, as we all tried our very best. It's only through promoting love, promoting care, great love, and purify one's mind. We have to be more diligent. We have to be more careful. We have to be more social distancing. We have to be more personal health. We have to be more caring to our neighbors. We have to be more caring to all other sentient beings. By doing that, we are able to inspire others. We are able to boost the great love and spread the good needs. Thank you very much. Amitofo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liao, for really sharing a little bit of Tzu Chi's work and then also reminding us that our faiths not only inspire and empower ourselves, but through our behaviors, we can then light that candle for others to follow. I'll now pass it back over to Rabbi Widom for reflections on his side. We had just heard him share about how important it is that we take our personal crises and continue to serve and bless the living despite the loss we may face. And let's see if internet works better for Rabbi Widom.
Thank you ever so much. I'm sorry for those interruptions. Is it working now? Hello?
It's good.
Hello?
I think it's good still.
It's
I'll let you
good.
know.
Good. Well, I just wanted to make some comments and join with Reverend Peggy Clarke when she spoke about Revelation out of the Unitarian Universalist congregations, that we would believe along with them that Revelation is an ongoing process and that we have to find in each day perhaps something new, something better, something revealed to us that would help us through. And I would also comment on what Father Brian said about what he found in the book of Genesis and creation, and how we're of one Father, therefore we all should be brothers and sisters. So Father Brian, to know that we've unified with our local Catholic Church, and that we help to feed the soup, supply the soup kitchen, the food pantry, and we seek to build together. But generally, just to comment, because Father reminds us, in the Bible, Moses, remembered, only becomes a person of worth when, as the Bible says, when he goes out to meet his brothers and sisters. Then the commentary is he has grown into a full person because he can then recognize the other. And that always becomes our task, always to recognize the other. The other is really at one with us, the interconnectedness of people joining together, always building together. And Moses now is prepared to give to something other than himself, and it instructs us to do what high love is. High love is the joy of giving. And merely to say that in our Jewish faith, we affirm that there's no private path to God, that our path is okay for us, but it's not the only one, that we have to join with all people of good faith and to build the kind of a world in which we would hope we can live, a world at one, because we believe that that's what we ought to be, at one. And also to believe that that when we do a good deed, that the reward is not what good deed has to be done for itself. And that's what I see Freeman to, that you're doing God's work, that there is my Buddhist brothers, sisters, serving.
Rabbi, your sound's coming in and out again.
What? Yeah, again.
Mm,
Am I?
just a little bit.
Can you still hear me? I just want to make one comment that the rewards of good deed, which means it's a good deed. And then if someone needs to be honest,
Rabbi, it's still coming in and out a bit, but we were able to catch the greater part of your reflections, particularly around the dissolution of the divide between us and the other, and how through the recognizing of our interconnectedness, we're able to build the better world in which we can all thrive in.
can I make a further comment?
Yes, please.
I would say that if we need something more than doing, it's one of a first satisfaction, work well done, time well spent.
Rabbi, it's still coming a little bit out in and out. If I may ask that you type the final reflection in the Zoom chat box, that might be super helpful from our side.
If this isn't working, I'm very bad at that. I don't do that.
I'm sorry about that.
Say is that I'm really optimistic, a faith that is to bind us with all here and everywhere. Being the world in which we would hope to live in, a world to be one. We will.
Rabbi, thank you so much for your reflections. I know we all had all of our speakers give some perspectives, and we have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to give time for our audience to also maybe ask questions or share anything. So we should have a raise hand function in the Zoom chat, and then also there's, if you want to type that you want to ask a question or directly type the question, feel free to do so. And I'll also open space for our fellow panelists to reflect, similar to how Rabbi Widom just did to each other, if you feel so compelled to do so. I will go ahead and allow for you to unmute yourself. So if you would like to unmute, that's more than possible now. I know maybe while everyone's taking a moment to think on their side, I'd also invite panelists to reflect with me. We've heard a lot about the possibilities that our faith traditions bring and how we're able to really move forward with a sentiment of hope through our actions. I'd love to also hear, if anyone has any thoughts, what are the gaps that you see right now here in New York City in your own communities that aren't being fully realized and addressed, that you think through interfaith cooperation, we can be of better service to our community? Where are those emerging or existing gaps, whether that is racial inequality or consistent poverty in certain neighborhoods, that you see is not getting the support and limelight that it needs to be fully realized? It's a tough question, but oh, Father Steve, go ahead.
No?
Oh, okay. I just saw your mic unmuted.
Well, that's because I was thinking loudly.
Oh. Sure thing. Let's see. If we would like, we can also go back down the speaking order. Oh, Father Brian?
Yes, there is in New York City, and I think justifiably so, a great suspicion of government and of promises made and promises broken. And I think this is where, as a religious community, we must both advocate for all our people, in terms of the areas that you mentioned, but also many other areas. But I think also that we as religious people have an obligation to deal with the communities that we lead, because all too often those communities themselves, and I can speak certainly of the Catholic community, are divided. And some are interpreting Christianity in a very unchristian way. And so we have obligations, number one, to advocate for those who have nothing. The Second Vatican Council, now 60 years ago, they brought about the title, the preferential option for the poor. And I don't think that has seeped down as deeply as it must, because we look at how great, quote, unquote, New York has grown. And yet you say, well, those used to be poor neighborhoods. Where did the poor go? And are they even in more destitution than ever before because they're being pushed out from their apartments and from their houses? And I grew up in a period as a young priest where landlords were burning out their tenants so that they could get higher rents and better buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that the poor at that point, and even now, are being properly assisted. We can't be patronistic about it, but we must be a cooperative with the poor in raising up their own dignity and our respect for them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Father Brian, for really recognizing the role that each one of our faith tradition plays in the advocacy and amplification of people's needs, particularly the poor and marginalized. I have Grove on stack to ask a question or reflect, and would love your perspectives, Grove.
Thanks. Thanks, Steve, and everybody. This has been a really beautiful session. I found myself taking many notes on what different people said. And particularly in times of grief, I think it's really important to remind ourselves of these core tenets of our faith traditions, because, you know, we need to remember to pick up the tools. I know personally for myself, there's been some deep grief, and what has really helped is actually action, physical exercise, because grief is heavy. One of the things I wanted to add in terms of your question about what's missing in New York, I'm not in New York since COVID. I've been mostly in Massachusetts, but I did a piece of work compiling resources on how faith traditions respond to violence, domestic violence, gender-based violence, because there's a pandemic of violence that is part of the response to COVID, whether it's due to powerlessness, whether it's due to people being too cooped up. But one of the issues there is for resources to help religious folks make sure that we're able to differentiate between outbursts of frustration, which are human and occur in all families and need support from religious leaders, and the exercise of systemic abuse, which is also part of domestic violence, but requires a different kind of understanding of the nature of how to help and intervene. I also just want to say there's the whole violence piece, but then there's a gendered differentiation in the impacts of COVID, which is that women are being called to do triple duty, and women are leaving the workforce in ways that are destroying decades worth of work towards equality. So to just heighten all of our awareness that this is happening and that domestic care responsibilities need to be allocated. And in a way, we need to honor men's fathering and the way they're participating and helping. But we know the statistics show that women do the care work. So just to raise these for all of our thought process, and I will try and put the links that I created into the chat. And again, this has been a very enlightening and soul-filling event. Oh, and just last note, as a pagan, this time of year is perfect for this, where we are starting to really fertilize and think about what commitments and initiatives we want to have blossom further in the spring. And for myself, I use the metaphor of a compost pile, which is also a direct reality of letting go of my burdens, the things that shame me, and allowing them to be transformed into a rich new fertilizer for growth. So thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Grove. And thank you for bringing up and raising the tremendous amount of risk that is present with gender-based violence, especially now that women are stuck with their aggressors. And as faith communities, we have a direct link to the family and an ear to the ground. So I'd deeply appreciate those resources if you could share them. And if not, feel free to email me afterwards and I can circulate it with all of our participants as well. I'll pass it over to Dr. Liao for some reflections.
Just as a further note to our Cafe 229, which is held every third Friday in the month, we have been able to invite many prominent speakers, including Matthew Ricard and Roshi at the Gen Center in New York. We are able to help promote compassion in action, how we can turn crisis and grief into hope and action. That's part of our ongoing effort at the Tzu Chi 229 Tzu Chi Center. Also, we are still open to requests for any interfaith, any organizations, individuals who are still in need of PPEs, food, financial and psychological aids. We have 2 family centers, one in Flushing, one in Manhattan, that we're able to help to relate to any personal needs to social workers, financial aids, and any other information. Also, third and not least, Tzu Chi is trying to procure with Kaipa on the vaccination that we're going to be able to have some breakthrough news by the end of this week. So please stay tuned to Tzu Chi and get in touch with us if you have any difficulties in trying to procure the vaccination. Hopefully it will become more available, and we are trying our very best to help in all this respect. Thank you very much, Kang En.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liao, for offering those resources and also for raising the vaccination issue. I think a gap that we're seeing emerge is the equitable distribution of vaccinations to the most marginalized. And so hopefully that continues to grow and evolve into a body of work. I'll pass it over to Carl for remarks on his side.
See, one of the things that I reflect on with your question about gaps is, gaps are different from neighborhood to neighborhood, from block to block. And one of the things we can do, one of the ways the Baha'i community thinks about it is how can we as neighbors bring some of these attributes that we've all been talking about into our homes, into our buildings, into our blocks, into our neighborhoods. We try to, how can we get them to think about the resilience we've been talking about today, and how can we be positive influences with the children, the junior youth, who we want to be leaders in, who we want to see as protagonists of positivity, rather than giving into some of the negative influences which they might fall into without some guidance. So these gaps, I think faith can help to be the ultimate grassroots protagonist of enriched thinking.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Carl, for offering such a practical action that we can all seek to take from the Baha'i faith. I know we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to make space for everyone just in case you have any closing remarks, and then I'll pass it over to our closing piece. Any final thoughts before we close out this session for us? If not, I'm deeply grateful for everyone for really taking the wisdom and experiences that your faith traditions and spiritual traditions have and sharing that with us. It's such a gift, and I'm so delighted that we were able to capture all of this wisdom into this session. And we look forward to be able to share this conversation as a resource moving forward to inspire, empower, and show pathways towards action away from grief and crisis, and really seeking to make our collective community a more resilient and prosperous one. I'd now like to invite our director of the Tzu Chi Center for Compassionate Relief, Katie Chow, to give us some final closing remarks. The Tzu Chi Center has been such a huge help in making this all possible alongside of our Tzu Chi New York office, so I'm delighted to have her say a few words as well.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks for all the participants with all the prayers, well wishes, and Matthew 25 for human needs. I'd like to ask you, please continue to support our efforts and programs and Tzu Chi Center, including Cafe 229, which was mentioned by Dr. Liao a couple of times. That is our monthly spiritual insight series. Mindful Eye, a bi-monthly inspiring video series to be launched soon. We have plans to run other projects, including in-person programs. Hopefully, when the threat of the pandemic subsides, we can then do those things. Again, hope to see you very soon. Good day and good weekend.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this conversation and dialogue. Super grateful to have you and look forward to seeing you all very, very soon on the Zoom or in person.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you all so much.